When was the last time you had a serious conversation about evil? Yesterday? Same. As far as topics go, evil is just not something that lends itself to lunch. Yes, I'll have the Cobb salad with the roast chicken, please. And while I have you, would you care to share your thoughts about the nature and cause of human suffering? Yes, I'll have ranch dressing with that. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. It may sound odd to say it, but this lack of ease, this lack of finesse, this is actually a problem for us here today specifically. 100 years ago, Unitarian Universalists, actually this would have been true for just about any group at that point waving the flag of liberal religion, but all of them as a group were collectively and roundly and profoundly criticized in exactly this way. Quote, "You have no way to talk about evil," end quote. Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians, and yes, our own Unitarian and Universalist ancestors, even Catholics, all of us 100 years ago had drunk pretty deep from the seductive cup of modernity. The 19th century saw a great many things: the retreat of superstition and fear, the end of human enslavement here in the United States, the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the expanding reach of science and democracy, and the flowering of a global enlightenment. Modernity as a movement took root and then took flight during this time. Much of the language of that time was imbued with a new sense of purpose and direction and possibility of and in our human project. We were, in short, overflowing with optimism. Our own Unitarian response, exemplified by perhaps the Reverend James Freeman Clark, continued with the powerful and now familiar to you all claim about the progress of humanity: onward, upward, forever. Evil was at best an anachronism, a ghost of our dark ages, a figment born of superstition and ignorance, a boogeyman that no one took seriously. Science knew better. Humans had evolved. Our society believed that the future was bright and that anything was possible. No one was prepared for what came next: calamity. The destruction and death that was World War I was simply unparalleled in the history of our planet. And so was the sheer scale of human suffering. The influenza epidemic that followed was just salt in the wound. Taken together, our world teetered over a chasm of horror that could not be explained or captured today. And into that chasm went the language of optimism, triumph, and progress. This is where, and precisely when, the fundamentalists and the neo-orthodox snuck in. There is an explanation, they said. The war was evil. The other side was evil. The destruction and the suffering and the failures were all the work of evil. And only by naming it this way, only in embracing this forgotten truth, they said, only by repenting of our stupidity, our arrogance, our hubris, only then might we avoid more of the same. To say that this was compelling undersells it by quite a bit. However, the liberal churches did rally. The roaring 20s roared. Reason and science and hope and progress muddled together with a bit of deliberate numbing and distance from horror seemed to win out, at least for a moment. The Great Depression was met by the New Deal. The Scopes monkey trial in 1925 kicked the fundamentalists right in the nose. The humanists published their first manifesto in 1933. And then World War II happened. And with it came the revelations that we now call the Holocaust. And that, as they say, was that. The critique that we modernists were unprepared to see, much less meet, evil walking alive and powerful in our world, that nearly did us in institutionally. In the face of blatant evil, liberal churches were empty-handed and empty-mouthed and soon just empty. Long before, we had turned away from evil towards progress, but when progress led to global catastrophe not once but twice, what did we have left to offer? And ever since 1950, our critics have said, not much. And that, my friends, is the problem with evil. The problem of evil is a bit different. The two are related, of course. To have a robust religious accounting for human nature, one that can explain how we got to now and where we can go from here, that relies in large part on how we define the problem. Is evil a fact of human nature? Are we flawed, broken, trapped in a state of total depravity? Is God in grace and repentance seriously the only way out? Is this it? Is this what we must do? Our tradition shouts a resounding no. We believe that human nature is at root not irredeemable. Human nature is not at root evil. Instead, we affirm and promote the opposite. We reject total depravity, and instead we affirm and promote inherent worth and dignity. And we do that in the face of history. We make this resounding rejection of total depravity. And we do it in the intent and meaning of our first principle. And that is why our first principle sits at the head of our principles. But how do we reconcile? How do we reconcile that with the fact of evil, with the Holocaust, for example? And a couple of months ago, it was during one of our pub theology meetings that we met to talk about this. Pastor Stephanie and I figured that this would be an easy and simple conversation. Something solvable with total strangers over a tasty adult beverage. It sounds a little funny. Yeah, fine. But revelation can come from strange places, so why not a brew pub? Getting serious about evil means getting serious about the language. So we asked the group to consider little questions like, what does the word evil mean to you? Is this word evil powerful, provocative, polemic, or problematic? Where does evil come from? Can there be evil without human beings? This last one, at least to me, is pretty interesting. It gets at the idea that there are lots of things that happen in the world. Earthquakes, floods, fires, mudslides, tsunamis, hurricanes, famines, plagues, stuff like that. Events that any insurance company would unironically call acts of God. And while these events can and do result in catastrophic human suffering, in almost all of them, there is no human agent, no intention, no action that was taken to bring about the event in question. You might call these, and some people do call these events natural disasters or perhaps natural evils. And maybe I'm being too much of a wordsmith, but it seems right to me that events like these are different from war, from torture, from human cruelty, from malice. Natural events are different than acts done with the intent to cause suffering. On the one hand, you'd have mass casualties, right? Those are as a result, say, of carpet bombing. That's horrific. On the other hand, you'd have mass casualties that are a result of wildfires. It's also horrific, but it's not evil. The difference, I believe, has to do with actions, with intent, and with outcome. When we sat down and debated it over IPAs and Hefeweizen and Pilsners and ales, it became clear that whatever else it might be, evil was a human thing. locating evil in humanity, specifically in those actions that do harm and are driven by malice. It's a very useful and functional definition. And it was also a great step forward and toward climbing out from under the problem with evil. But first we had to deal with the problem of evil. Now, just to refresh, it goes like this. If God is all-powerful, knows everything past and present and future, is always and everywhere present, and is also all and only good, then why does God allow good people to suffer at the hands of bad people? Either God cannot intervene, in which case he is not all-powerful, or God chooses not to intervene, in which case God is not all good, or God is too busy, too removed, too absent, too uncaring, too unloving, too ignorant, too something, and therefore isn't the God we think God is or should be. If there is evil in the world, the argument goes, God either does it or God permits it. And that is a problem because once upon a time, God did do stuff, right? You can check out the first 5 books of the Bible for some very colorful and bloody examples. But these days, God isn't doing stuff. So perhaps what? God is dead, or if not dead, just beyond our ken. Now, for the record, none of this is new. People have been struggling with the idea of evil and reconciling it with human suffering for as long as there have been people. The oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, is entirely about this. God makes a bet and lets calamity fall on a truly good and righteous person. It says it right there. He's a good and righteous person, beyond blame. Nevertheless, now Job is upset and asks why. And the answer Job gets, God is beyond human understanding. You will agree with me, perhaps, when I say that this is a crappy answer. Perhaps that's why later writers tried some different approaches. Now, some said that evil in the world comes from God. We ignored God's wishes and laws, and therefore, kapow, divine punishment. You can check out some of the Hebrew Bible for some extended and colorful explorations of this approach. Other writers have suggested that suffering and evil come from us, from our freely made choices, specifically our choice to sin, or perhaps relatedly, as a consequence of the choices, the sins of other people. St. Augustine famously tied everything back to Adam and Eve, the original sinners, and concluded that we did all of this to ourselves. It's our just deserts. Welcome to Christian thinking for the next 1,000 years. I will offer that this is also a crappy answer. Many centuries after Augustine, Gottfried Leibniz suggested that evil did not come from sin, but from freedom. That is, humans have free will. But given that we have free will, this world really is the best that God can do. Evil is sort of baked in, it's a compromise. I will suggest that the response to this that was given by Voltaire, immortalized in the play Candide, shows quite clearly how absurd this is, as our hero suffers all manner of indignity, harm, and horror in this, the best of all possible worlds. I will also offer, for no particular reason, that this is not the play to take your 10-year-old twins to. For the record, these 3 Christian responses to evil, that evil is the consequence of sin, or the consequence of free will, or to the mysterious mystery that we cannot hope to understand, they all stink. And not the least of which is that all 3 make God a villain. This makes me uncomfortable because whatever your definition of God, villain doesn't seem to fit. I'd like to pause here and note that we have better tools these days. Back when the fundamentalists were taking the liberals out behind the theological woodshed to chastise them for their optimism in the face of calamity, the science of psychology wasn't a thing. It was just barely a thing. And given that we are the faith that celebrates the insights of modern science, I cannot think of a more appropriate answer to the fundamentalists and all of the liberal sympathizers who today still indiscriminately and reflexively consume and repeat what is and has always been propaganda. And yes, I am looking directly at the collected mass of my UU colleagues when I say this. Today, we know what good and evil, we know that good and evil are no more simple than nature and nurture. Today, we know that the human brain is the most complicated thing that science and human experience has ever encountered. But it may surprise you that it wasn't until 1959 that we started seriously exploring and then taking seriously the relationship between the mind and the world. Prior to the work of Noam Chomsky, the mind was magical. It was a sealed black box, as beyond our ken as the God of Job. What we have since learned is that humans and human behavior are astonishing and astonishingly complicated. Because context matters, circumstance matters, biology matters, diet matters, education matters, community matters, aspirations matter. And unless you are either obtuse or selling something, the problem of evil is just not as simple as Augustine made it out to be. It is a puzzle, yes, but it is one we are making real progress on. Go science. So shifting gears just a bit, I will remind you that a couple of weeks ago, I offered a vision of God. I suggested then that God was a good and helpful idea, or could be. More, that God could be a real and powerful tool, both in our lives and our work in the world. Even better, that God might be thought of as an expression of our evolving collective human aspirations, a lure that urges us to learn, to heal, to know, and to grow. And to do this work in community, with compassion, always in the spirit of love, empowered by, yes, an unrelenting optimism. God is that which invites us always forward toward a progressive, positive, unending, unyielding vision, one marked by our deepest yearning, a vision that is itself filled with laughter, lament, longing, and light. Our omega point, the singularity, humanity 2.0, whatever we call it, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is that God can be purpose and direction, and that change, justice, agency, diversity, and practical goodness would therefore all be hallmarks of God. I like that. I offer it up with the full knowledge that it is all very grandiose and invites today, in this context, a rather grandiose definition of evil. And I'm going to refrain from doing that. And I'll do it for a very specific reason. I reject the notion that evil deserves elevation to the level of our highest aspirations. More, that the temptation to simplification and abstraction accomplishes nothing interesting or good. What is evil? It's complicated. Why is there evil? That is an excellent question. Because to be perfectly blunt, we have chosen to allow it. And there, I said it. And that may be hard to say, as well it is hard to hear. It may also be theologically unsatisfying. Still, it's true. Because what we now know is that this question, whence does evil come, is a question that has and should have many possible answers. And just as it is so, it invites many practical responses. Getting serious about evil means getting serious about basic human needs: good food, clean water, treating people with respect, providing health care, opportunities for learning, for growth, for dignity, for agency, for flourishing, and ending war. The problem with evil is it's just the wrong question to judge our tradition by. Because musings on metaphysical malice is just not as interesting as our response to it. Let me say that again. Wherever evil comes from, the point that our liberal religion has been successfully making for almost 200 years now is that our beliefs are simply not as important as our actions. And after the genocides in Darfur, Congo, Rwanda, Bosnia, Somalia, Kurdistan, Zimbabwe, Cambodia, East Timor, Uganda, Burundi, Pakistan, and so many more, what is abundantly clear is our actions still are profoundly lacking. And retreats from that truth that end with God is mysterious, humans are sinful, and that this is the best possible world are cruel. What we know is this: however we choose to face the problem of evil, the problem with evil is and always be this: how we respond. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.